Today, we address the dream of a green future and the nightmare of physics, economics, and petropolitics.
And now, the Edwin Black Show. Sponsored by the books of Edwin Black, available on Amazon and at booksellers worldwide. And now, here's Edwin.
Welcome to the Edwin Black Show. I'm Edwin Black, investigative journalist, historian, and author of IBM and the Holocaust, War Against the Weak, and 10 other books. If you like what this show is doing, tell a friend. You can subscribe for alerts at theedwinblackshow.com. If you want to support our work or sponsor a show, get yourself to theedwinblackshow.com/support. We can't do this alone. Your help, big or small, assures our complete and utter intellectual and journalistic independence. Again, that is theedwinblackshow.com/support. We have solidarity today from many national organizations, such as the Emerson Family Foundation, the Fuel Freedom Foundation, Stand With Us, JNS, the Israeli American Council, EMET, American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists, Scholars for Peace in the Middle East, ZOA Michigan, the Gross Family Center, and many others. Today's episode is sponsored without conditions by the Emerson Family Foundation, which for years has been trying to improve our world for everyone. Today, we welcome guests from across America, including our 4 watch parties in the villages, Newton, Mass., Chicago, and Tampa. Overseas, I see viewers logged on from, I see Australia, Holland, Germany, Great Britain, Canada, Mexico, Brazil, Israel, and other countries. Here's a special viewer shout out to our friend Harvey in Florida. Stay strong and get better. If you have a question limited to today's topic, place it in Zoom's QA feature. The Edwin Black Show, along with our YouTube site, is global and fast growing. We speak frankly and without partisanship to a fragmented world seeking better understanding of our tormented past, our present very, very tense, and a future still uncertain. By the way, stay tuned at the very end for my special parting thought at the very end of the show, just before I sign off. But first, 2 observations from the week. Item 1, it is hard to believe, but Israel almost routinely fought a war in Gaza a few days ago. It was the 3-day Operation Breaking Dawn. This was a very different Gaza war and achieved with great success. Islamic Jihad, an Iranian-funded proxy in Gaza, whose top leader, Ziad al-Nakhala, is in Tehran, where he coordinates anti-Israel terror attacks. For days, Islamic Jihad was firing anti-tank rockets at the Israel communities near the Gaza fence, crippling their ability to leave their homes and bomb shelters and even deliver agricultural products to the rest of the country. Instead of a broad retaliatory attack against Hamas, Israel focused on the Islamic Jihad splinter group to the exclusion of Hamas. New and highly specialized munitions were able to detonate and destroy just the apartments and offices that IJ used and leave the rest of the buildings standing. Within hours, the entire senior echelon of Islamic Jihad operating in Gaza was neutralized. Plus, its weapon storage facilities, both above ground and below ground, were attacked by the Israeli Air Force and largely eliminated. Again, Hamas was notified they should stay out of the battle. Despite every announcement and behind-the-scenes shouting match among the factions, Hamas did in fact stay out of it. Israel achieved all of its objectives, separated IJ from Hamas, and confined the military action to military targets. But there were 2 other essential strategic victories. First, Israel immediately authorized a call-up of 50,000 reservists, mainly to support 24/7 aerial and intel operations, and declared it was prepared to fight For a week, by not waiting days for a call-up, Israel showed its resolve in the very first hours of the operation, not as an act of weakness, but as a right now upfront readiness. The second strategic move was in the information space. Almost in real time, Israel posted videos, radar records, and other documentation proving that its attacks were provably hyper-precise and limited to military targets when civilians were not present. Moreover, the footage and tracking info provided beyond doubt that it was misfires by Islamic Jihad that came down in Gaza territory and killed civilians, including children, not Israeli attacks. This time, the typical Hamas fake out would not work. Israel even put out audio tapes of communications where the random men on the street in Gaza phoned to ensure that people were away from the ammo storage facilities and other terrorist infrastructure. Even the Associated Press published articles showing that the civilians who died were killed by terrorist actions and terrorist errors. The result, many people outside the Israel watching community did not even know the 3-day war was fought. Israel won 3 big wars: military, geopolitical, and public relations. Congratulations, Israel, for doing it all precisely, correctly, and intellectually. In Yiddish, we say with seichel. Item 2, the 600-pound gorilla in the room, the unprecedented, stinking to high heaven raid on President Trump's private residence at Mar-a-Lago that has transfixed the nation. The raid was over a document dispute with the National Archives. First, an insight into the National Archives that I am personally quite qualified to give. I am one of the very few members of the media who has actually researched extensively in the National Archives and handled presidential papers, classified documents of all categories, and has an intimate understanding of the process. To be more detailed in the research for my many books, such as IBM and the Holocaust, I've devoted many long days and sometimes weeks in the National Archives, both the original in downtown Washington and the newer facility in Maryland at College Park, and even a little-known ancillary repository in Chicago. Likewise, I've spent long, exhausting days in the National Archives of Great Britain, France, Germany, and Israel. The back of each of my books lists the scores of archives utilized for each volume. The U.S. National Archives operates hyper-secure facilities accessible to key people on a highly restricted basis. The confidential access backrooms of the downtown facility maintained chain link security gates with sign-in, sign-out sheets between every small room to control who moved from place to place at what time with what documents in their hands. The more commonly used modern facility in College Park, Maryland, allows heavily screened researchers into reading rooms where roving monitors intrusively look over your shoulders nonstop to ensure you are handling documents professionally and per archive etiquette. But all the papers viewed can be self-photocopied for a few pennies each or by your approved scanner on the spot. If a document is classified, a researcher can request on-the-spot declassification. I myself have arranged for hundreds of documents to be declassified, mainly connected to World War II. When it comes to presidential papers, and I have accessed many, there are always disagreements about what is a private paper and what is a presidential paper, which archive has the right to it, and how much overreach the head archivist's attempt to exercise will intrude. Here are real-life examples. The president hosts a state dinner and passes a note on a napkin to his wife saying, "Give this guy more wine," close quote. And yes, I've seen a lot of napkins, hand-scrawled notes, and marginal comments in my day. Is that napkin a personal memento or a presidential paper? And where does it belong? In the National Archives, the State Department Archives, the Presidential Library Archives, or a personal papers archive? Or is it retained for the biographer when the memoir is written? Many historians will tell you the most valuable FDR papers are not found in the National Archives in Maryland, but at the FDR Presidential Library in Hyde Park, New York. Joe Biden's personal archives from his Senate days repose in more than 1,875 white and brown boxes stacked on parallel shelving units 6 rows high at the University of Delaware. Moreover, there are often archive wars. Archives often selfish, domineering, and highly competitive people. They pump themselves up by the collections they manage. It should be their archive and no one else's. So the process of sorting out which archives and collection gets which piece of paper is often a contentious argument among the paper pushers and paper guardians. Another insight, when they say papers are classified, big deal. Almost everything the president touches is classified. His daily schedule, although released to the public, is automatically classified confidential. If he scribbles a note to his wife in the margin of that printed schedule saying, "Sweetie, I would rather be with you than meet this general again," that could bump it up to secret. If Kim Jong-il writes him a note and says, "I love your hair, who's your stylist?" Is that a private paper for the biographer, for the presidential library, for state or national archives? The point is to send in a squadron of FBI and other federal agents, including a Marine unit with a machine gun mounted on its bow over which papers go where and how fast. No one is buying it. I have never seen the nation so upset and motivated. Not just Republicans, but also many independents who now see that the FBI and Department of Justice has been weaponized. In a Trafalgar poll just a day or two ago, more than 75% of Republicans and about 54% of independent voters all believe Trump's political enemies are behind the FBI raid on his private home. Polls show independents and Democrats are now much more likely to get out and actually vote their fears against what is widely seen as a banana republic abuse of power. And everywhere I hear, and even if it's from law and order people, if they can take down the president and his associates, the supporters are next. This is not about Trump. This is about any ex-president, whether his name is Nixon, Johnson, or soon to be Biden. Moreover, after the spectacle of a fake Trump-Russia scandal where the FBI was the linchpin and a fabricated computer log, the matter prosecuted by John Durham in an ongoing investigation after a nothing burger Mueller investigation operated by Trump antagonists so pronounced they were fired and disciplined after wiretap warrants repeatedly and fraudulently obtained from the nation's most sensitive court, the FISA court, based on fraudulent affidavits. I am hearing the staunchest law and order people say they don't trust that the FBI will not once again rely upon faked evidence. Personally, knowing this is the same FBI that in my adult lifetime blackmailed Martin Luther King in the COINTELPRO operation under the direct baton of J. Edgar Hoover. And yes, I personally confronted the FBI in their secret digs in Chicago in a faked Department of Agriculture office. I, for one, and among the many who will not believe the FBI if they reported they found the body of Jimmy Hoffa in the basement right next to Goldfinger's nuclear device in Melania's closet. I will have more to say about this in the several upcoming episodes. But for now, we move to our main topic, a green future reality check. Today, we address the dream of a green future and the nightmare of physics, economics, and petropolitics. Before we write a blank check to our green future, we need a reality check on what is involved. As it is, we have the uneducated, misinformed, and radicalized politicians in Washington leading the uninformed and politicized to a green revolution where the country is not ready and possesses no battlefield awareness. As many of you know, for decades, I have been part of a small army of crusaders trying to get off of oil, get into sustainable energy, and address environmental injustice. I've written 4 books addressing the topic, including Internal Combustion, which won 4 awards, Banking on Baghdad, British Petroleum and the Red Line Agreement, and The Plan. I invented the word petropolitics and have lectured widely. From all this study and agitation, I have learned what the experts know, that there is no fast fix for generations of oil addiction. First, it is all political. The labor unions and the Democrats have for years thwarted all plans to get off the internal combustion machine. Otherwise, the post office and the Defense Department would have long ago switched to alt fuel and alt energy fleets that would have catapulted the country into a green new world. Democrats lie on this issue. The Republicans have reinforced the oil industry with legislative incentives, decades of reliance building, and war whenever necessary or whenever fundraising makes it convenient. Republicans lie on this issue. The media flashes shiny objects and superficial reporting on untested technology and fails to highlight the hard facts that can truly inform our country. There are some realities. One, if it is a word that the energy world knows, but most of my viewers do not know, that word is volumetric. In short, it underpins how much uninterrupted energy can you pull out of a confined area, say a gas tank. Compare a 10-gallon gas tank to a Tesla battery pack, a hydrogen storage apparatus, or a 3,000 PSI CNG storage tank that weighs 200 to 300 pounds. Critically, what we fill in that tank makes the difference. Yes, it is the dirtiest and most corrupting of all fluids, known as petroleum, or it could also be alcohol-based or blended fuels, such as ethanol in any combination from E15 to E85, or some newly developed bacteria-based propellant, as is now being developed. I remind the electric car was invented in 1835. The hydrogen fuel cell was invented in 1838. All the commercial vehicles were electric at the beginning of the 20th century. And that a decade ago, I personally drove a cheap, off-the-shelf Chevy Equinox equipped for hydrogen. I pulled into a public Shell station on Santa Monica Boulevard where the electrolyzed and purified water was in the hose. My hydrogen tank was filled, no motor, just hydrogen creating electricity to power the wheels. I drove all over Southern California all weekend on a single tank. Hey, guess what? No motor, no UAW union jobs to build engines. The technology exists and has for some time. We just need today's solutions today and tomorrow's better solutions tomorrow. But remember, the all-important scrappage rate is 10 to 13 years, which means people will not replace their existing gas car for a green car for a decade. And the EPA has passed regulations which criminalize inexpensive conversions to CNG, even where it is abundant, such as Utah. Solar panels can be a boondoggle. Their efficiency is low. Their slave labor in China is high. And when they wear out, the toxic nightmare in its most renewable aspect. California is now contending with recycling solar panels from 1.3 million rooftops coming to a landfill near them. Try replacing the battery on an electric car. It is often a 4-digit expense. The truth is there are many forms of alt fuels and alt energies, not just one. EVs are fabulous. Give me a Tesla. I'm ready. But the average car runs just 35 miles a day, and a city car can be powered by many fluids or energy sources. Solar energy is desired, but solar roofing is preferred to solar panels. And photosensitive paint was invented long ago. Homes and factories can be powered by ocean therms, ocean tides, sunlight, geothermal as they do in Iceland, and even harnessing footfall pressure on floors. Not all with a green sheen retains its luster. Remember, technology means big business. Many electric companies were operated by a criminal class of machine gun-toting gangsters, such as St. Paul and Minneapolis. Electric vehicles means software that allows the company to turn off your vehicle with a software click. We're not talking hacking here. Tesla did just that to an angry consumer who disputed an $80 charge. Imagine if the emerging control-oriented government suddenly decided to disable EVs that did not pay a disputed IRS assessment coming from the 83,000 new IRS agents. Or perhaps they just wish to disable all the EVs in one area. The dream of a green future is too often a phantasmagoria. To help us understand more, we are joined by one of the smartest and most knowledgeable and realistic energy minds in the world, Yossie Hollander, who had the good sense to pick me among others to star in his impressive Get Off of Oil movie called Pump. See it on Netflix. You may recall I bleakly warned, where there is no will, there is no way to get off of oil. But first, one of America's most ardent, most battle-tested alt-fuel gurus, the co-publisher of the Auto Channel, Marc J. Rauch. Marc, you are in the driver's seat. Take the wheel.
Thank you, Edwin. It's great to be here. It's great to be with you always. Yossie, it's always fabulous, and it's a great honor to always be with you on the stage. Hello, everybody, everywhere in the world. We have a pollution problem. And guess what? It's a man-made pollution problem. And we've probably been having this man-made pollution problem for, I don't know, a few thousand years, ever since people used to be throwing their human waste outside their front door, or throwing it from the second floor if they happen to have a second floor. And then, of course, we had all the years of the terrible pollution of the horses with the manure all over streets of cities, causing terrible problems, disease, filth, smells, everything else. So we have that. And today we have something else. We have air pollution. We have water pollution. We definitely have this. And it's created largely by man. And the people who are responsible for this are the people that my company, the Auto Channel, actually happens to report on all the time. Automobile-related companies, automotive companies. So here we're in the situation, and here I am in a situation where this is my bread and butter, how I make a living. And so I have to tell the truth about it. And the truth is that internal combustion engines are fantastic. They are wonderful. They are the greatest inventions, in my opinion, of all time, maybe even better than television. And I love television. But there is one terrible thing wrong with internal combustion engines. And that one thing is that they use too much gasoline and diesel fuel. Gasoline and diesel fuel is poison. They are made from poison. The ingredients are poison. They have things like benzene and toluene and xylene and ethylbenzene and all kinds of this other stuff that is terrible. And then there was a time for 50, 60 years when we were putting tetraethyl lead into this poison. And so we were making it doubly, triply poisonous. And this is the kind of stuff that if it gets on your hand, if you smell it, it could drive you crazy, literally crazy, and it could kill you. And then here's the funny part. In order to sort of mitigate some of the corrosion aspects of TEL, right, which is lead gasoline, in order to mitigate that, they used to put in ethylene bromide. Ethylene bromide is another poison. So now it became a quadruple, whatever it is, poison. And this is the junk. Now, it took a lot of years. And finally, Congress said, well, we're going to ban most of its use. They don't ban all of its use, but they ban most of its use. So that's where we are. So we have this unbelievably fantastic, great engine, but it runs on this terrible, crappy stuff. So what else could happen? Well, we could use ethanol in it. Ethanol, you drink. Ethanol, you rub on your body. Ethanol, I mean, sure, if you drink too much, it could hurt you and could kill you and all that stuff. So don't drink it, right? Don't drink too much. But that's not what it's being used for. And ethanol is safe. It's made right here in America, can be right here in America, and made by anybody. Everybody watching this right now can make their own ethanol if they wanted to. And you could make it high enough proof that you could put it in your car and you could drive on it. That's an unbelievable thing. Okay, now, we're faced with this thing about electric cars. And there's only two groups of people who are interested in electric vehicles. One is the government, and the other is the automobile companies. The government and the automobile companies want it for one reason only, and that is for its revenue potential. Yes, electric cars are good and they're fun, and if you have enough money that you could have one and drive one, it's all good. But you know what? When I was a kid growing up in New York and Brooklyn, I used to go to the bumper cars in Coney Island, and they were run by electric cars. So I got all of that. I understand electric cars. I understand how much fun it is and all that stuff. Doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, when we have autonomous driving, you're not going to be able to go fast anyway. All your speeds are going to be regulated by computers. If you happen to be able to figure out a way to go fast, it's going to get reported to the police, and you're going to find in the mail or on email, you're going to find yourself with a $500 speeding ticket or something like that. So it doesn't matter, right? We don't need it. Okay. So now, why do these guys want the electric cars? Well, the automobile industry, their sales have been stagnant for 50 years. I've talked about this before. They've been stagnant for 50 years. They sell between 14 and 17 million cars a year, every year in America. Sounds like a lot, but it's not. If it was a lot, then General Motors and Chrysler wouldn't have gone bankrupt. Ford almost went bankrupt, but they were able to sell some land, save themselves from bankruptcy. However, they still wound up borrowing billions of dollars from the government that, my understanding is, they have never paid back. So if 14 to 17 million new cars a year was so great, then why would they have had to go bankrupt? They shouldn't have had to, but it's because it's stagnant and because they need more than that. If the automobile companies can get the government to issue enough full edicts or silly little edicts to push people into electric cars, then it means that we will have a few years of new car sales that will go probably to 30 million a year, maybe 40 million vehicles a year. The car companies are hoping that this will save them. Now, of course, in the end result, we'll get to a point after 3 or 4 or 5 years where we'll already be saturated. We won't need more of that. Car sales will fall back to be 14 million or something like that. And so the car companies will ultimately go right back into the financial problem. But they're hoping, each one is hoping, that they could be the big winner and last out, be last man standing. That's a stupid way to run a business. The government wants this because if they could push new car sales to 30, 40 million new cars a year for a few years, tax revenues will skyrocket, right? They get enormous amounts of revenue from the sales of cars. That's why every city in America, if they have a chance to open a new car dealership, even though they don't need another car dealership, they do it because it's a big ticket item and they want to be able to reap the rewards of the revenue.
All right, Marc, we are running out of time. I had hoped you would cover more of the alt fuels that you're an expert in. I'd like to react to your interesting remarks. First of all, I'd like to talk about electric cars, of which you are an expert. The vast majority of people do have a desire for electric cars. I remember several years ago, nobody really wanted an electric car except an aficionado. But today, the Tesla models are poised to be the #1 model either this year or next year that will be sold. You really nailed the fact it built on something I said, that if you're in an electric car, it means that all of your speed can be regulated. What was once a traffic camera can now be an internal regulator that will report you to the state authorities for driving too fast or perhaps even driving too far. Now, to get a better understanding of some of the legislative matters, we're going to turn to probably one of the best in the field, a great critical thinker, Yossie Hollander. Take it away, Yossie.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Marc. I won't comment on, although I don't agree on whatever you both said, but that will be later. But although I agree with most of what you said. But we have a very interesting situation right now, whether we agree or don't agree on what the severity of the climate crisis is. It is a severe crisis by some minds, especially the one in the administration. If you look at this administration, it is dramatic change from the Obama administration. I don't know if you recall, Obama said all of the above, meaning we will use all energy, okay, fossil fuel energy and green, so-called green energy, okay? So he never tried to kill, at least officially, and he really didn't, okay, try to kill most of the other energy, maybe coal a little bit, but overall, he didn't kind of try to shut down fossil fuels. This administration is shutting down fossil fuel around the world as fast as possible and move to a green so-called future very quickly without having the technology to do it. So basically they want to starve us, which will have other implications in our society, which they also want politically. So we're looking at a very, very, very interesting situation. And this week, we still don't have the final bill because it still has to go through the House, but we have the framework already passed through, or the details passed through the Senate. We have a new Green New Deal, which is called the Inflation Whatever Something Act, Reduction Act or whatever, which again is a funny name. Guys, this is one of the most amazing bills ever passed in the United States. This is a summary of the bill, okay? 11 pages, 1 line or 2 lines on every item in the bill. Each line like that is a regular bill we used to have for support, let's say $2 billion, $5 billion, $3 billion for a program that we used to argue about it, okay, for 5 years, okay, in the House and Senate. This just, they released hell on everything. They're totally unbuilt, okay, to handle it. We're talking about not what they're declaring that it will be 400 billion, it will be trillions, the way it is actually structured, okay? The way that it is structured smartly, so the OMB will only report it is 400. These are trillions of dollars going to all kinds of groups. It's so complicated, just to give you an idea, that just for the fiscal year 2022, they're giving the Treasury Department $500 million just to design and plan the tax credit system. Okay, we are going to have now an army of 20,000 people, each one expert on a different item of this law, that basically you're going to distribute billions and billions. So if the Department of Energy knows how to distribute $5 billion a year, maybe they can increase it a little bit, but not much. They have to develop a whole new techniques to do 50. But the EPA, for example, the Environmental Protection Agency, doesn't have a clue how to distribute the money because they don't hardly distribute any money. Suddenly they have to distribute 40 billion. What do you think they're going to do? How long is it going to take them to build infrastructure to build it, and how political and inefficient will that be? I can read you just a few lines, okay, that some interesting things. So for example, they want to encourage production in the United States. So basically, a lot of the tax credit will only go to batteries assembled and produced mostly in the United States. Well, apparently 65 or 70% of the cars that will be produced over the next 3-4 years by GM cannot meet this, or by all the auto manufacturers cannot meet this criteria. So let's expect some noise about that in the future. So this is one. They also sneakily put in a small tax increase. So guys, there's 16.4 more cents per barrel which is a tax on your fuel, okay, quietly inserted into that, okay? They didn't call it a gas tax, they put it on the barrel. We have another gas tax. Give you another example of what's going on there, okay? So we're looking at, for example, they increase the royalties, okay, on oil and gas from 16 to 18% and change. Again, this will be going directly 2% more to where? To the consumer. This is another way to tax the consumer, basically. But it's not going to tax the company, they're going to roll it to us. Just to give you another ideas, okay? So they say we'll give $5 billion for fiscal 22 for the DOE to give up to 250 billions of loan guarantees, which is basically loan you don't have to return, for infrastructure projects with very vague definition what they are, mostly in the greenhouse gases, okay? I can tell you that people that have been submitting proposals for greenhouse gases reduction, if they involve fossil fuel, they never got them approved. So if you, for example, gave the government, okay, I've got a system that will reduce greenhouse gases from oil production by 80%, you'll never get money from it from the government because they don't want to encourage any production of fossil fuel. This bill has tons of money going to tons of people and basically blocking all fossil fuels in various ways. They have a few handouts here and there to the oil companies, etc., but they are taxing more and more ways to produce energy, and they're giving grants just everywhere, okay? Just an example, okay? They're giving 2.8 billion in just fiscal 2022 to environmental and climate justice. Now, nobody knows what that is and where does it actually go in these things, okay? Now, they're giving 20 billion, up from 2 billion, to tribal lands for energy projects. There's no reason to have separate energy project for tribal land. The more efficient one is the more concentrated one, okay? We don't have a separate power station for a tribe, okay? We have a power station for a state or a region in a state. So we're looking here at a big giveaway, very inefficient, and most importantly, they don't have the infrastructure to give it away, and some of it has to be given away in the next year. So I expect chaos, corruption, a run for the money. Any energy company has to run for the money because if they don't run and get it, somebody else will get it and they'll be non-competitive. They're going to distort the market completely and the solutions that people deserve, and they were going to raise the cost of energy for people, not by raising their taxes, but raising the cost of energy itself. Watch your pocket.
All right. Well, I think that was an amazing insight, and I agree with quite a bit of it. There's a lot to discuss here. This can't be our only show on this topic, but we are loaded with questions, live ones submitted and in our chat, and the ones here. Let's start with the watch party in the villages. We heard that most Detroit electric cars will not qualify for the EV tax credit just legislated. Why is that? Well, that's correct. And they even issued a press release a couple of days ago from Detroit, from the main automobile manufacturers. And Yossie actually just alluded to it. But why? Because there is a provision, a little known provision, that's probably well intended, but not realistic, which says that there's a cap on the amount of components that can come from China that will sunset in 2023. That's next year. And the car companies can't suddenly invent a component industry. It has to be built from the ground up. And this is part of what the Green Revolution is trying to do. They don't understand that there's a long runway time to develop some of this. Yossie, what do you have to say about that?
So there's two issues here. One is component, the other is materials. And they don't want to have certain material from China, which is a long-term process, but at the same time, they wouldn't allow anybody to open a mine in the United States. So it's like one hand is not only giving you the permits to do the mine, the other one says you can't get the materials from places we don't like. And unfortunately, everything here takes time. People don't understand the volumes of it. So as much as I'd like to replace oil tomorrow, the world is consuming 100 million barrels of oil a day. Okay, replacing that infrastructure is a 40, 50-year project. Okay, we can replace parts of it, part of the time, whether by ethanol, whether by hydrogen, whether by CNG, whether by electric cars. But anybody who thinks there's a miracle that you can switch it over the next 3 days or the next 3 years, I think is just doesn't understand numbers and financing and how the market works. So that's unfortunately the people writing these laws. They just don't understand how manufacturing works.
And I have 3 words to add to your remarks: China, India, and Africa. As Africa emerges, it needs automobiles. India is making cheap automobiles for its rising lower and middle classes. In China, it's very well known that we are moving to bicycles and they are moving off of bicycles to cars. Marc, what do you know about the Chinese and Indian auto markets?
Well, they are unconcerned with certain things that America is highly concerned with, which has to do with safety. The Indian automobiles, the inexpensive automobiles, the problem is, and why they never got sold here, is because they don't meet our safety standards. Now, maybe you could say some of our safety standards are a little too high, but I don't think that's the right thing to say. But I have to go back, by the way, to what you had said earlier, what Yossie said, and what one of the questioners is writing about, and that is that I didn't jump into other alternative fuels because ethanol is the only alternative fuel that could be used right now, today, this afternoon, to power every single internal combustion engine in America.
And that's right. And in fact, it's just a computer reset, as Yossie Hollander's movie Pump and to allow not E15, but up to E85. And any flex fuel vehicle with a yellow cap can accept ethanol now. Correct, Marc?
Well, that of course is true, but it's more importantly, every car on the road is a flex fuel vehicle. Why? Because every single car in the road can use more than E10 and E15. It can use E20, E25, E30, E40, and E50. You only need to reset the computer or have a little device put on your engine if you want to go to E85 or higher. But if you don't want to go to E85, you want to stay around E40, you don't need that device. Every single car on the road can use it, no matter, of course, it has to be a, an internal combustion car, but every single car. So that's why I mentioned it.
Marc, what is the highest ethanol blend that you have personally driven, whether it was obtained at a gas station or made in your backyard?
Maybe E85. And the reason I say maybe E85 is because E85 is almost never E85. It's something less, depending upon where in the country you are, what the season is, who the blender is. It can be as low as E51, and then it may only be as high as E83.
So what you're basically saying is, even if we went to E50 overnight, we could cut our gasoline consumption by half, correct?
Oh, it would be enormous. And more importantly, when you get up into the higher ranges of E30, E40, E50, you actually get better performance and better mileage. So when people are worried about, oh gosh, I'm going to lose 3% more by going from E10 to E15, when you move up to E30, you will get the same, maybe sometimes better mileage than you're getting at E15. So you're not only saving an enormous amount of money every gallon you're buying, but you're getting as good or better mileage. Now that's an incredible thing. And that, I've talked about this for years and I've proven it in my own tests, but not only have I proven it in tests, the US government proved it in 2000 tests that they conducted 108 years ago.
All right, let's move to...
There's one thing I may want to add is that in order to reduce gas prices, which is what people are more interested, you don't need to replace that much. All you need to add is 1 million to 2 million barrels a day of replacement, and then the price will go down.
All right, that's an important observation. And that is probably the 1,000,000 barrels that they have repressed since the Biden administration came in. But that 1,000,000 barrels is now also in our environment because Iran and Russia are selling it to India and China. Let's go to our watch party in Newton, Massachusetts. I know that Marc knows that Newton, Massachusetts is the birthplace
Big Newton.
of the Fig Newton.
Who doesn't know that? God.
Okay. The question is, I think Yossie's going to answer it for us. How do you recycle a windmill? Go ahead, Yossie. How do you recycle a broken, non-functional or not needed windmill?
Today we don't. We just bury it. We don't know how to recycle it because there's no economics to recycle it. Okay. There is economics to recycle electric batteries because they're expensive material there. And I think eventually we'll see factories doing that when the volume justifies it. But right now we don't have technology that economically allows us to recycle them. So you got to bury them somewhere or drop them somewhere.
Where have they been buried?
I don't know, somewhere. You got to deliver them.
So
wherever somebody will not object for you, and wherever the lawsuits are cheaper.
Okay.
The windmill blades can be broken apart and melted down, and various things can happen. Yossi is correct in saying that the economics of it are incorrect, right? That it becomes more expensive or too expensive to do, and so it would be simpler to just try to throw it away. But all those things can be done. Same thing true with solar panels. But, you know, we're dealing with an issue of unintended consequences by people who think that they solve some issues by saying, oh, we're going to have a green plan. You know, 30 or 40 years ago, when I moved to California, California changed to, they stopped wanting to have paper bags in supermarkets, right? Because we were killing all the trees and we're using up the paper. So we went to plastic bags. So all of this great emotion, this great sentiment of people who wanted to do something to save the trees and save the environment, what did it do? It gave us a plethora of plastic bags, a whole big problem of it. Now, by the way, if those plastic bags were made out of alcohol, they can be biodegradable. So we wouldn't have that problem, but they don't do it. So we're still stuck with the same petroleum oil garbage.
All right, let's go to our watch party in Chicago. We could talk about this for hours. How do you capture solar power in the nighttime? I'll answer that, and Yossi could chime in. First of all, as you may have guessed, there is no solar power in the nighttime. But during the daytime, it can be absorbed, and you can only do 3 things with it. You can use it, you can transport it, or you can store it. And currently, they're playing with all sorts of batteries. And one of the storage, and I won't even call it battery, one of the storage systems they have is hot volcanic style salt. What do you know about that, Yossi?
This has been a sodium. You're talking about sodium salt. This is one of the ways people are doing it. It's still not an economical. It's just an advancement on the solution. We're still probably 20 years away from efficient, at least, okay, efficient high voltage battery, okay? And we can have some home Tesla batteries and stuff like that and others, but they're not economical on a large scale. The key issue, can we have something that we can have a large solar field and store it for use by a factory in the night when there's no sun? We're still although the technologies are improving, we're still very much far away from that, okay? So don't get excited about that technology or that other technology. Between a technology that will be theoretically good until it becomes a functional technology in large volume, you have 20 years. And we are 10 to 15 years at least away from a technology that is good enough.
And I think that what you're really saying is we need a combination of technologies. We can't just rely on one. We can't just rely on solar farms. We can't just rely on wind farms. We can't just rely on geothermal. Thank you for that. Ron in Council Bluffs, I think that's in Iowa, or is it Nebraska, Council Bluffs? It's right across from Omaha. I know that much. He says, how many archives have you been to for research? Well, Ron, I think I've been to about 200, maybe 300. I can't count. But as far as this show goes, I've been to the archives of British Petroleum, of Ford Motor Company, General Motors, Iraqi Oil, and most importantly, all the national archives that have records related to their oil transactions, especially those of the diplomatic, commercial attaches. And let me tell you something, and I think Marc might know this, when you're flipping pages like this for 8 hours a day, looking for some words to pop out at you, it can get you pretty tired at the end of the day. But thanks for the question. Ernesto in Rio, why did America block Brazilian ethanol? Well, I think this is a fabulous question. And I know that Yossie and Marc both know that this is part of politicized fuel petropolitics. In order to protect the American producers, they put bank loan prohibitions and import prohibitions on Brazilian, which is one of probably the most successful ethanol story in the world. And they could have easily shipped Brazilian to Texas. They could have shipped it to Florida, to all sorts of places. What do you know about this scandal, Yossie?
I think Marc is probably a better expert on that, but I can tell you for a very simple reason. As you said, this is politics, okay? You got to get elected and you got to protect the corn ethanol. Now, it used to be that corn ethanol was more expensive than sugarcane ethanol. I don't think this is the case anymore because of improvement in production in the United States. So it's really it used to be historically important. Right now, that protection doesn't exist and doesn't need to be there. But there was a question, there's a lot of other calculation, how much greenhouse gases in there, etc. These are all mechanisms by which the government and the politician interferes in the market. They don't let people buy whatever they want.
Now, I think that Yossie said an important word. He said ethanol from sugarcane. I don't want people to think that ethanol comes just from corn. And by the way, it's not agricultural corn for food. It's cornfields that's low grass, that's low quality corn. And in fact, ethanol fuels or alcohol fuels, by whatever name, can come from any plant object. Marc, quickly, 30 seconds. What do you know about it?
We used to get people from Brazil asking us to help promote Brazilian ethanol coming into the United States. And we refused to do it at the Order Channel. And we refused to do it because we don't need it. We can make all the ethanol we need by ourselves. We can make it cheaper, and it's from our farmers. And needless to say, we want to support our farmers. What's funny is the opposite is now true, where Brazil now imports American ethanol, which includes corn ethanol, and Brazil is actually using a lot of corn now to make their own ethanol. So that's the reason. It wasn't brought here, but it wasn't needed. The oil industry invented something called the blend wall in order to make it to show that we don't need it. And of course, there is no such thing as the blend wall, but they use that as the way to say, we already have enough, and we do have enough. Okay, now regarding the next question, ethanol could be made as you say, from anything. Ultimately, the best source is going to be from algae and seaweed, because you can get up to about 30,000 gallons per year per acre of algae and seaweed. That's how much ethanol you could make, 30,000 gallons, where corn is somewhere now around 400 to 500 gallons per acre per year. So we're talking about 100 times more from seaweed. And the good thing about that is it requires no land, and it requires no water, and it requires no fertilizer. So it's an unbelievable potential. But you say, well, why don't we do it? The reason we don't do it is because we don't need it. The reason we don't need it is because we don't have a big enough demand. And the reason we don't have a big enough demand is because there are too many people running around shooting their mouth off about ethanol and telling lies and exaggerations.
All right, let's move to Peter in Marcia in Los Angeles, which is not far from Yossie's home base. These guys always ask an interesting question. Has anyone threatened you on your oil investigations? Well, they've tried to threaten me, but it's been a bit of a joke. The main threatener was I had some thugs from the auto union show up when I went to the labor union archive known as the Ruther Archives, where they have all these deals. But what General Motors used to do is they used to threaten to pull their advertising from my newspapers if they would run my stories. And of course, they tried to stop me from getting my hands on a congressional investigation showing that General Motors was the powerhouse of the automotive revolution with the Nazis. But other than that, nothing much. Thanks for your question, Peter and Marcia. Tracy in Springfield, Illinois. How about fueling stations? Well, this is a fabulous question because it's a chicken egg. It's easy to say, I have an electric car. Where do you recharge the car? It's easy to say, I have a hydrogen vehicle. Where do I refill that? It's easy to say, I have an ethanol car. Where do I get E15, E85, whatever you're on? Yossie, what do you know about filling stations?
So there's a company in Texas, a large chain, that basically found out that they make more money, okay? That is, more people come to fill out on E85. They make just more profit on selling E85 at the pump. And the way they do it, but they don't have it in all their station, because what they look basically in the service area and count the number of flex fuel cars. If the number of flex fuel cars is large enough, they're going to put a pump because they make more money on it. If there's no flex fuel car, they're not going to put a pump and waste space in order to put a pump that nobody will actually stand next to, okay, to fill up. So basically, it's a question. There's no problem to finance it. There's no problem to put it on. Every actually gas station would put it on because they make more money on it. The only question is, do we have enough flex fuel cars? And right now we don't, because there was a program that encouraged it and in terms of credits and stuff, and now there isn't. And the reason there isn't is because people are trying to block competition.
All right, let's go to bacterial fuel. Norm in Indianapolis. Tell us about bacterial fuel. Yossi, what do you know about the slow emerging science of manufacturing life forms and adopting them to create fuel?
So basically, remember what we have most of the CO2 is sucked from the air by photosynthesis with a combination of water, energy from the sun and the CO2, and then it produces sugar, which is, by the way, ethanol, okay? That's how the plant actually works, okay, basically. So people are trying to develop processes within bacteria that will be just faster than the plant, because the plant is a very slow process. And if they'll manage to speed it up enough, then they will be able to use bacteria to produce fuel. So we're moving on the scale of that, but we're not there yet.
But the yield is very slow. In 30 seconds, Marc, what do you know about bacteria?
Well, basically, it's going to create an ethanol. It's going to create an alcohol fuel. I mean, that's all that really happens when you have the bacteria that's creating, that's fermenting, and then you ferment it. You take the fermentation and you distill it. So it's basically the same process. Fuels, there's a whole variety of wonderful alternative fuels. And I like propane, and I like CNG, as you know. I mean, I've had the cars that run that stuff, and I like electric. I like all of that stuff. But I always go back to alcohol, ethanol, because right now, this afternoon, this minute, you could put that stuff in your car and drive wherever you want to drive, and you don't have to do anything to the car.
All right, let's move.
If the United States said E20 is legal tomorrow, okay, and everything has to be E20, price at the pump will be half immediately.
Will be half if they
immediately. It's one declaration that they have to pass.
So if they went from E15 to E20, the price at the pump would go down immediately, yes?
Immediately.
And they won't do this because the oil companies have enough bakshish in Washington to reduce the amount of ethanol being used, correct?
Right. And And EPA, when they 12 years ago, when the EPA announced that E15 was perfectly fine for all cars, they also tested E20, and they found exactly the same thing with E20. And we know from a fact from Brazil that you could run E25 and E27 and higher. So it all could be used. So they could do it immediately. CARB recently, California Air Resources Board, just a couple of weeks ago, finally announced that they were approving E15. It's like 10 years after EPA said E15 was okay, California Air Resources Board says, well, we're going to test it. And what did they find? Well, of course, they found exactly what EPA found. But they've been holding this up for now 12 years. And it's silly and it's crazy.
All right.
Everybody can use it.
All right, Marc, let's get to Wes in the Bay Area. He says, a small correction. It was not a raid on Mar-a-Lago. It was a search warrant for specific materials that were apparently not returned to the National Archives. That is not a raid. I'm sorry, Wes, you're completely misinformed about what a raid is. Take a note down. Use your pencil and paper. I said it was a raid. Not only do I say it was a raid, everyone in law enforcement that I've spoken to has called it a raid. When you show up with a machine gun mounted on the Marine unit in front of the front door with guys with M16s, you are given 2 or 3 minutes notice by the Secret Service just as the guys are coming in the door, when you don't even bother to issue a subpoena, when you throw lawyers out of the rooms in which they're in, it's a raid. They called it a raid. I call it a raid. And regardless of what CNN calls it, it's a raid. Let's go to another question. Denise in Wilmington, North Carolina. Does emptying a strategic oil reserve bring down prices? Answer, no. And the reason is strategic oil reserve, which has a 28-day supply of oil, is for interruption. It allows us, in the event of a pipeline going down or a war or a blockade, it allows us to drive. But you have to remember something. Every time you shoot 1 million barrels out of the strategic reserve, you have to buy it again to fill the reserve up. So therefore, you're buying it at the expensive price you're trying to reduce it to. Yossie, do you have a 30-second appendix to that remark?
Well, the last time we really filled it up, we actually got paid for it. So remember, during the crisis of the COVID, the price of oil was negative for a while because of some market issues that people didn't have enough storage. President Trump ordered us to buy a few million barrels that time. So we actually got paid to put it in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. More importantly, we have a totally uninformed administration. When they were releasing this from a few million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the Secretary of Energy could not answer the simple question, how many million barrels a day of oil we're using?
And that
tells you a lot about what's going on. These are not professionals. I'm sorry. We used to have professionals. We used to have people like Ernie Moniz as a Secretary of Energy. Okay, I'm deliberately using a Democrat here. Okay, as an example. Okay, he was a professional. He knew the data. He was a scientist. We're not using political people that have no ideologues with no clue about the numbers. This is a business.
All right, here's another question from the San Francisco area. Yossie takes the view that government will make a mess of dealing with global warming and the private sector would do better. Yet, in fact, the private sector has failed to do much of anything, given how large the problem has grown over the last several days. So government is finally stepping in because markets have failed to mitigate. I'm going to answer that question for Yossie. The companies are corrupt and the politicians are corrupt. There's such a thing as a lobbyist. And everything we've said here today and a great deal that we could say in 2 or 3 more hours would indicate that the government is stepping in not for the people, but for the companies who are paying them. I got 10 seconds for you, Yossie. What do you say?
I recommend that everyone a book to read, which is not yours or Marc's. I'm sorry. Okay. It's called Unsettled by Steve Koonin, who was Obama's chief scientist of the energy department. And it's a real, very good look at the realities, not the propaganda, okay, of climate change. And this is a guy who's been doing climate change for 20 years. So, and the bottom line is that there's no rush. We have plenty of time. We need new technologies. The current technologies and policies are just going to get us into more trouble and going to kill more people.
All right, let's go to Rick.
And it's guys like that Yossie was just talking about that I refer to when I talk about climate change, because he's exactly that kind of guy. Is exactly the guy. In fact, in my big paper that I've written about climate change, I include him. I include a couple of his video clips, and that's exactly correct.
All right, now we're not going to go into climate change at this time, except to answer Rachel in Manhattan. Billions in climate justice will go to NGOs promoting and suing climate profiteers and state for what they call climate justice. The BLM is an example. Climate justice is racial justice. Well, I will answer that. When I first used the word environmental justice about a decade ago, when I wrote Internal Combustion, there was indeed a racial component to it. There's a poverty component to it, because the energy infrastructure, the highway infrastructure, who's living right next door to all these toxic areas, these toxic fuels, that is absolutely an issue. But I brought it out as a basis for improvement. I think that there are other people and NGOs who wish to bring this out for a means of dismantling and reordering the country. We don't have time for all the questions that we have. Here is another one from Margot. When can we stop talking and start acting? I love your show, by the way. I also love the show, and we are talking, well, we're talking to allow you to act. Here is Trevor in San Diego. What is your favorite hydrogen car? All right, so I'll go last. In a word, Marc, what's your favorite hydrogen car?
The BMW that I drove 15 years ago that was powered by hydrogen internal combustion engine.
Are you saying it was liquid hydrogen?
Yes.
It was liquid hydrogen. Okay, not hydrogen gas.
No, I like, I had test driven some VW product over here in West Sacramento. And it runs on hydrogen for the fuel cell, and they're all great. You know, VW makes great products. They drive great. So I like all those cars.
All right, Yossie, let us have it. What is your favorite hydrogen car?
None. I think that hydrogen car is basically electric car powered by the hydrogen. That's what people must know. And as far as technology, they're just 20 years behind the electric car. Therefore, they already lost the battle. Okay.
All right.
So in reality, when you look at markets and volumes and that, they lost the battle too late. Stop dealing with it. It's a history thing. We don't need money. Although this bill gives a lot of money to hydrogen.
All right. Now, hydrogen, I've been a hydrogen proponent for a lot of years, even before Arnold Schwarzenegger had his hydrogen Hummer, I believe. But I will just say, A, you are correct that the hydrogen car is an HEV. It's a hydrogen electric vehicle. The hydrogen, the water, if we're using water, it could also come from natural gas. The water that turns into hydrogen creates the electricity. So it's not a separate power source like solar. And now I will tell you what my personal favorite for hydrogen cars is. And that was, and Marc, don't say anything. It was the Honda Clarity. The Honda Clarity was a beautiful car.
Beautiful.
It was absolutely beautiful. And it was another one of these Honda frauds, like their CNG car, that they brought out to make people think that they were on the cutting edge of new technology, cleaner technology. It was a car they wouldn't sell. The Clarity itself at that time was leased. They have a Clarity right now, but it's not a hydrogen car. And anyway, that was my favorite. All right, we are out of time. So I want to thank my crusading guests. We differed on a lot of things. Marc, Rauch, and Yossie Hollander, and my talented international team, including Wes in the Bay Area, Lance in Michigan, as well as many others around the world. I'll see everyone here next week, 3 p.m. You want to be a friend of the Edwin Black Show? Go ahead. Go to the edwinblackshow.com, click support. Until then, head over to any Barnes & Noble in the USA or any Amazon platform in 190 countries across this planet where you can find any of my 200 book editions, such as IBM and the Holocaust, War Against the Weak, and Internal Combustion. You want an autographed copy? Hit my personal website, edwinblack.com, and click books. Get passwords and access alerts to participate live in future shows at the edwinblackshow.com. You'll see a much enhanced and produced version of this show. Please see it. Prior episodes by subscribing to our YouTube channel at the Edwin Black Show. Click the notification button. You will love them. We put new ones up each week. Follow me at Edwin Black Book on Twitter and Facebook. And now for my closing word of wisdom, a warning. If you think you have a date with destiny, you better show up on time. Thank you. I'm zooming out.
And don't call me Shirley.